Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I'm sure that senior leadership is really the answer to that narrative, anyways. I think there's plenty to play for, right? You know, it was about a month ago that I was explaining what the BubbleCon levels were in on this podcast, right? So I think that the guys have plenty to go off of when it comes to reasons to be motivated, and they would be the second class that Izzo's ever to not the Final Four that stayed for 4 years. So that's its own motivation as well. I I struggle with the playing worst as favorites type of deal, because there's been plenty of years where LSU in the 2009 tournament was a 2 seed in the Final Four, right? I mean, they were the favorite in all but the Elite Eight game leading up to that, and that didn't seem to have too much of an impact. It feels like it's easier to point to the situations where that has gone poorly, just because it hurts much more. But I'm not so sure that that's a narrative I buy generally, anyways.
I will say that I was there last year in New York when they lost to UConn, and aside from Keith Appling, I would say Travis Trice probably took it harder than anybody. He was in tears, and he felt that he had let down the seniors for them not getting to the Final Four. So that streak meant a lot to him. And he said, when I was getting recruited, Izzo said, you're going to go to a Final Four. Everybody goes to a Final Four. So that's, like you said, you would think plenty of motivation. But you can always tell when the intensity is picked up a notch, and you could tell that that's what it was in the Virginia game, especially as Izzo noted, they changed how they defended a certain thing Virginia did, and everybody was locked in on it. I think that intensity will be there. I think this is a team that generally has been very close. The chemistry's good. I don't think it will be much of an issue, but it's kind of funny seeing MSU fans balance wanting to be happy about all the attention, but then worry about jinxes and all that jazz. But so they will be playing Oklahoma on Friday night. Tip is officially 25 minutes after the previous game ends, at which starts at 7:37. So MSU is listed as a 10:07 tip, but it's probably going to be more like 10:20, maybe even 10:30. So it's going to be a late one out there in Syracuse at the Carrier Dome. The Sooners come in having beaten number 11 seed Dayton by a 72-66 score to move on. It was a game where they jumped out to a very quick lead, hitting a bunch of threes. Dayton stormed back with a couple of runs, and then Oklahoma pretty much ended the game on a run to come out with a 6-point victory. They defeated Albany by 9 in their first game, so they haven't beaten a single-digit seed in this tournament yet, but they're 24-10 on the season. They come out of the Big 12, which was considered by many to be the top conference. They're actually ranked number 11 in KenPom, which is 6 spots higher than the Spartans, and it's a much different Oklahoma team than in the past. This MSU team played Oklahoma last year, and the Spartans put up 87 points in Brooklyn in a game that featured, I think, more than 60 free throws between the two teams. Oklahoma's got the number 6 defense in the country, according to KenPom, and offensively number 46. In terms of their profile, they don't get to the free throw line very much, and they don't foul. So that's something to keep in mind, as it kind of became an issue for the Spartans over the weekend. Nothing really stands out at what they do on offense. They're pretty good at the free throw line. They are number 135 in effective height. They basically play 2 guys that are 6'8", and everybody else is 6'4" and lower. But this is a very pretty fast team, number 57 in tempo. They're going to kind of want to run it as MSU will want to run it. So theoretically, that would play into how MSU wants to move its offense, but it's something Oklahoma's dealt with. Joe, when you look at the Sooners, what jumps out to you?
Yeah, I mean, that defense is going to and challenge than Virginia, right? Virginia, the pack line is a little different, and actually I'm not familiar enough with Oklahoma to know sort of what their secret sauce is when it comes to defending. But to defend at a high tempo in the way that they do, they got to be doing something right, and it isn't a single shot blocker or anything like that. So that'll be really interesting. It'll also be interesting offensively, defensively, with the bigs that Oklahoma does have. I just don't know. I think it looks like they've got one guy who can shoot from outside. That has sort of been an issue, especially for Gavin Schilling in some games during the Big Ten tournament, and also I think a little bit against Georgia as well with the European guy had. So that's news that they only have one big who can shoot a little bit. He'll probably go something like 4 for 5 from 3 in this game.
Yeah,
been going from SU, but that is a good thing. I'm not sure how good the Big 12 ended up being this year. I mean, they did well non-conference, but clearly in this tournament they've been a little lacking, and some of that has to do with matchups, and some of it has to do with just poor play. Right? Iowa State got upset early. Kansas lost in the second round. I mean, outside of and then Baylor got upset in the first round as well. I mean, they've been basically terrible in the tournament. So that's for the Big 12 and the Big 10, which we've been talking about as being a down conference for some time now.
Did I lose you, Joe? See if we can get Joe back in here. Dang internet, huh? What can you do? Joe, you there? I heard something. Joe, is that you? Joe, you there? Somebody's there. Who is it? Who's clicking? Is that you, Joe?
Yep, I got you. Sorry.
Oh, we're back. Sweet. We didn't have to cut it out.
Okay, that's good. Sorry about that.
Did you just get up and walk around? I heard somebody walking around.
Yeah, I got up and messed with my router just because I had a feeling that I had something to do with that, and it looks like my signal strength is stronger now. So.
Okay, I actually turned the bandwidth down too, so maybe that'll help. Okay, you were talking about the Big 12 not being that great of a conference.
Yes. So, well, at least we'll see, right? I mean, they ended up with some poor draws here. I mean, I think Kansas got sort of the short end of the stick with Wichita in the second round. I mean, Wichita was, horribly underseeded as a 7. But then also, I mean, both Baylor and Iowa State lost to very beatable opponents in the first round. So it'll be interesting to see if that conference quality really translated at all in this game. And yeah, it'll be that all of that's going to be sort of fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and a name you're going to hear a lot of on Friday is going to be Buddy Hield or Hield. I'm not quite sure how to say it. He is their top offensive threat. He averages 17.3 points per game, and about half of his total shots come from behind the arc. He is how big is he? He's 6'4", and he really leads the way in a lot of their offensive categories. He doesn't commit many fouls. He shoots 36% from deep, which is not great.
That's probably artificially low, just because if he's taking a lot of end of shot clock shots and stuff like that. Typically, it's like Travis Trice, right? Travis Trice is shooting something like 36 or 37% from 3, but
you don't
he's a much better 3-point shooter.
Yeah, and you don't take that many unless you can unless you can make them either.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And good at the line at 81%. This is a team that generally is pretty good at the free throw line. He is a longtime friend of Lou Rawls Nairn. The two grew up in the Bahamas. They both went to Sunrise Academy in Kansas. And actually, I believe Nairn was looking at going to Oklahoma and following him there until MSU got in later in the recruiting process and was able to bring him in. Joe, I don't know if you've seen much of Oklahoma this year, but what kind of matchups does he present?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the interesting things about the statistical footprint of Oklahoma, at least, is they only have one guy who averages more than an assist rate of higher than 15. They only have one guy, and so in terms of per game stats, that's one guy who averages like 4 assists per game, and that's it. The next highest is like 2 per game, and I think that's Buddy Hield actually. But that's borne out too in their assists per field goals made. They're pretty low, 262nd in the country in terms of assists per field goals made offensively, which suggests that they're going to play some hero ball, which is kind of exciting from a defensive perspective because those are easy teams to defend. I think they can also be frustrating teams to defend if if the ISOs go in such a way that they're making their shots. So there might be some difficulty in defending them if they're hitting shots, but something tells me that they're not going to be getting a whole lot of quality looks just because of that fact, right? They're not going to share the ball all that much. It's going to probably be Buddy Hield, Isaiah Cousins, and Tashawn Thomas kind of doing their thing. And yeah, the ball sharing isn't going to happen so much. So that's the thing that is sort of encouraging from an MSU perspective, and that'll be interesting to watch as well, just to see if they're actually going to share the ball some or not. And they go pretty quick on offense. They're 31st in the country in terms of possession length offensively. So something tells me that there will be some bad shots hoisted by Oklahoma early in the shot clock. So rebounding will be pretty important there too.
Yeah, and this is a team, Oklahoma, that you mentioned the three-point shooting. They're only at 34.6 on the year, but they started out, I think, something like 6 for 7 against Dayton, and really lit it up quite a bit from behind the arc there. But it's not really their game. And I will say that most of those shots were completely wide open. Dayton's defense in stretches was not very good. So you mentioned Woodard is looks like their point guard. His assists per game isn't great, but his 22.2 assist percentage is far and away the best on the team. And he's only at 6 foot, so you figure that's going to be the matchup Lou Rawls and Nairn will have. Although maybe it could be it'll be interesting to see how MSU does this, because this isn't going to be probably isn't going to be a lineup that you see many too big setups from Oklahoma. In which case, maybe you don't get a lot of, or maybe you get a lot more Brandon Dawson at the 4, Valentine in at the 3 with Nairn and Trice in there, which is how they start. But I don't know if there'll need to be many. I don't think there'll need to be many lineup tweaks to match what Oklahoma's going to have out there. In which case, the guard staying out of foul trouble is going to be pretty big. And
the good news there is that Oklahoma doesn't draw a whole lot of fouls, so that's helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think that Izzo will sort of have his pick of rotations, right? I don't think there's any particular matchup that's would be so detrimental that it couldn't happen. In fact, this is maybe one of the few games where you could play Tum Tum, Trice, and Forbes all at the same time for stretches, because sometimes there's a guy on the wing for an opponent who just sort of makes that a really bad proposition, and maybe Buddy Hield can do that. I mean, it sort of depends on if we continue to see Bryn Forbes defend the way that he did against Virginia.
Yeah, and when the shots go up, MSU was beaten pretty hard on the glass in over the weekend, especially by Virginia. Oklahoma comes in, 162nd in offensive rebounding, 175th in defensive rebounding. Not, pretty average there. Like we mentioned, pretty much two guys who are 6'8", nobody bigger. So I think this is a game where MSU may not be able to afford to get killed in the rebounding like they did at times. And I don't think they should, based on the personnel that they put out there. If you have Valentine Dawson and a big out there, you should be getting, most of those rebounds. So I'm sure that's a focus this week.
And I wouldn't think that the defensive rotations will need to be as frantic as they were against Virginia.
No.
So
and you probably won't have much Dawson at the 3, where you did, because against Virginia, every time he was as a 3 and guarding out at the perimeter, it always, and those shot from out there, it pretty much felt like Virginia got the offensive rebound every single time. It'll be interesting to see how Marvin Clark fits into this, given MSU is going to be going small. It'll be interesting to see Clark's minutes compared to Gavin Schilling's, given Clark kind of a more versatile type of player. When I look on Oklahoma offensively, it kind of reminds me of Georgia in that there's nothing really spectacular that they do. They just kind of do what they do, and you gotta play good defense against it. It's not like a Virginia offense where you're waiting 30 seconds or a special kind of offense you got to prepare for. But defensively, that's where Oklahoma has made their bread and butter this year, which doesn't fit what they've been in the past. I mean, a year ago they were 91st in defense, and they were relying on their offense. It's kind of what they've been doing under Kruger. But this year it's the defense, and so it'll be interesting to see what MSU can do. Trice has really been playing strong, and again, I think it's going to come down to the fouls with the guards, and if they can keep 2 ball handlers out there, because when it was just Trice out there, there was not much anything going on for that MSU offense. Offensively, how do you think MSU plays this out? How do you think they attack them?
I think, I would assume that we'll try to get out in transition a little more than we did against Virginia.
And this seems like a team that is used to running, so it might be there.
Yeah, and I'd be interested too to see the splits, and this is probably some research I'll do for the preview that I'll have up by Friday morning. But the transition splits, right? How efficient Oklahoma is offensively and defensively in transition. So that stuff is always really interesting to look at. I mean, Georgia, for instance, was significantly more efficient defensively when they weren't in transition. With Virginia, it didn't matter too much because they just didn't allow teams to get in transition often, anyways. But I think pushing the tempo is something that this MSU team will try to do. I don't think that it'll be too much of an issue to do so, because of things that Oklahoma does well, turning over other teams is not one of them. And so that's the way I'd go. I'd go with it, just considering sort of the adeptness and on offense that MSU has. And then in half-court sets, I always like it when they get Bryn Forbes the ball in a catch-and-shoot situation, especially from the left wing, where he's just totally lethal. And so those are the types of sets I'd like to see him run. Something tells me that individual ISO plays aren't going to be incredibly effective. Early on in both games, there was some Denzel Valentine, floater stuff that they did, which was kind of weird.
He always seems to do that early in games, and it's generally pretty effective. And then it kind of goes away from it. He gets that shot up real quickly, that it doesn't really get blocked.
Yeah, if he can make that, then sometimes it can require a little additional help from the defense, and so that could be good. But yeah, to me, those types of situations are relatively low efficiency, right? Floaters and such are pretty low field goal percentage shots, and so I'd like to see them kind of stick away from that. I also think that it's probably a bad matchup to try to pound the ball inside with Dawson or with Costello, just because even though Oklahoma doesn't have a ton of size inside, it does seem like the guys that they have down there can block shots pretty well. And again, those are pretty inefficient possessions when those happen. So I would say it should be a pretty perimeter and transition oriented game for MSU offensively for them to be effective.
Yeah, and in the end, I think Oklahoma is a better team than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I mean, they come into the game 11th in KenPom, and KenPom actually has Oklahoma by 55% chance, basically making the game a toss-up. So by no means is this supposed to be any sort of easy game. It's a Sweet 16. It's going to be tough. Oklahoma's battle-tested this year with a tough schedule. So, I mean, before we kind of look at the rest of the region, what's your pick? How do you think it's going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a nail-biter, and I think it could potentially be pretty low scoring if Oklahoma takes care of the ball pretty well. But I do think MSU gets the win, and I think it does so just because the numbers are not reflective of the defensive effectiveness and intensity that this team has brought over the last couple weeks here, and sort of people finding and filling their roles. So I think it's gonna be an MSU win, but I think it's gonna be really close. I think it'll be like a 1 or 2 point game.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, in a way, it sort of feels like UConn in a sense that they've gotten over Virginia, and people had kind of penciled them into that next spot, and UConn wasn't anything particular MSU hadn't seen before, but they just played a really good game, and maybe Oklahoma gets that from Buddy Hield and that defense. I think this will be a low-scoring one. I think getting out in transition, as has always been the case with this team, is absolutely vital, and I think with the way they'll kind of be matched up with Oklahoma, they'll have the athletes on the floor to be able to do that. I'm picking MSU in a close one, I think, like you said. Now, if they win, speaking of last year against UConn, they will have a pretty rough turnaround if they're able to advance, because the Elite Eight games on Sunday are 2 and 4:30, which means MSU is getting done with their game 12:30, and then 36 hours later, or maybe even 36 hours later or a little bit more, you would have an Elite Eight game against North Carolina State or Louisville. And I think that's something that kind of gets overlooked when you look at that UConn game last year. That was a really, really tough situation. When you've got an MSU program that banks on being able to make the adjustments between 2 weekend games, really cutting that time down is a factor. Now, if they play a team like Louisville, I think it's a team that Izzo is very familiar with, and they'll probably have Louisville stuff from the past. But NC State's a team that comes in having upset the number 1 seed in the bracket in Villanova. Very talented team that maybe doesn't always live up to it, but they did beat Duke. They did beat some good teams. They're both in the ACC. They did play Louisville on Valentine's Day, and apparently because they only played once during the regular season, they were eligible to meet in the Sweet 16. But NC State's a team that relies a bit more on its offense and its athleticism. Louisville's a team that relies more on its defense and its pressure. If MSU were to get to the Elite Eight, which of the two do you think they'd rather see?
Oh, it's NC State, and it's not close. And I think a big part of that too is that you referenced this article earlier from 538, saying that Izzo is the greatest March coach of all time or whatever, or at least since '85, I think was the time window. In any case, the point I'm trying to make here is that Pitino is number 2 on that list, and so and part of it too, they wouldn't have a whole ton of time. I mean, they'll have an additional 2-3 hours to prepare, but at the same time, I think and nothing against Gottfried at NC State, but I think Izzo could be, if Izzo can be matched in March, Pitino is one of the few who can do that. And I think that Louisville, they've got the experience in the tournament coming in. I mean, obviously in the last few years they've been to multiple Final Fours, and I think even though this MSU team has the number of ball handlers that can sort of break the press that Louisville likes to play, I do think that NC State game is much more preferable. NC State was not particularly impressive even in the first round against LSU. They required.
No, they won on a buzzer beater.
Yeah, so beating Villanova is a phenomenal accomplishment, and obviously NC State's very, very talented, but I would significantly prefer to play them just because of the experience factor and the coach factor.
Yeah, I think for the same reasons. While I think this is the team that has the guys that could break a press, the familiarity between Izzo and Pitino would most certainly make that a tough affair. So I think if you're MSU, NC State, with its inexperience, would be doing a similar short turnaround with a Final Four on the line, a pressure situation. I think NC State's probably who you want to out of that. Looking at NC State's schedule, they had a stretch where they won and lost games for something like almost a full month. Then they lost 5 of 6, and they ended up finishing the regular season winning 5 of 6. And so they're a team that has the talent, but sometimes they get it together, sometimes they don't. And between the two, I think Izzo would most rather play NC State for those same reasons that you said. So,
and also they're a team that they're kind of happy to be here now, right? I mean, if they were
Exactly.
to beat Louisville and make it to the Elite Eight, like that's not a team that would necessarily expect to win. I think Louisville would come in with an edge in that sense, right? Like they know what it takes to get to that Final Four. They expect to do it because they've been there before, and I think that mindset could be not a disaster, but could be is just not ideal. You'd prefer to play NC State.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens against Oklahoma. Again, we'll do a post-game show after that game. It'll be late, I know. It'll probably be a short show, but if you guys want to join us on that, please do. We'll see what happens and go from there.
Yeah, it's been fun the last couple of times being interactive and such. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, we welcome questions. It's kind of the whole point to interact with you guys. So that we'll finish up hoops there, but we're going to shift into a little bit of football talk here. We're recording this on Tuesday, and D'Antonio had his pregame presser, and the depth chart came out. Nothing major of note from D'Antonio, but he wouldn't basically say anything about Delton Williams or McGarrett Kings, only saying that their future is in limbo for their suspensions, for their legal activities. They are not on the depth chart. Michael Geiger, kicker, is not on the depth chart. He's out with a hip injury. He will not be in spring practice. A couple position changes of note among starters. Demetrius Cox moves into a corner spot. He had been at safety, but he had played corner later in the year and showed some promise there. That wasn't too surprising. The other corner, you've got Darian Hicks or Vayante Copeland. So Darian Hicks had a struggle at times as in his first year as a starter. It's pretty clear that they're looking for competition there. Lawrence Thomas, at 300 pounds, moves to the outside to defensive end, while Malik McDowell moves into a starting spot ahead of Damon Knox, actually, at nose tackle. So you got your biggest guy in that line on the outside, but Thomas has shown some good athletic ability. That was pretty much. I mean, a running back without Denton Williams, you've got Madre London or Gerald Holmes at running back as the starters. There's not a lot of certainly not a lot of experience there, because then you look at T.J. Harrell and Gerald Owens behind them, although obviously the incoming freshmen aren't involved in this. And Monty Medeiros listed as a starting wide receiver with McGarrett Kings out. So those are some changes. Nothing too surprising though. we kind of know where this program's at. We kind of knew what was coming back, what wasn't. Joe, when you kind of look at the depth chart, was there anything that jumped out to you?
No, one of the things that was interesting was that they kept Nick Tompkins at corner, even though that tailback situation is sort of in limbo. That field corner spot opposite of Demetrius Cox, I think, is a real concern. Just with the way that Darian Hicks was exposed at times last year. I mean, the year of experience might be really helpful, but at corner sometimes, especially in this system, pretty quick whether or not a guy's going to be pretty effective. I mean, there were times when Darqueze Dennard came in for who was injured at that time? I think it was
Chris L. Rucker got
for Chris L. Rucker, right? Like he was immediately effective. Or when Trey Waynes came in for Johnny Adams, when Johnny Adams had an injury, he was immediately effective. And Darian Hicks just hasn't been that guy. And so Vontae Copeland is interesting there.
Yeah, and Vontae Copeland's a guy who wasn't highly recruited, but the staff was really high on in recruiting, and they apparently carried over throughout his redshirted freshman year. The fact that he's listed as a co-starter without, any game experience, I think that's a promising sign for a guy like him, who at 6'2", 200, it's pretty big. It's a pretty big corner there. He's looking at the depth chart. He's the second heaviest guy in the defensive backfield behind Chris Leno. So that's kind of a big guy for a corner, but they appear to like him.
Yeah, and yeah, other than that, I mean, pretty straightforward. The one thing that does concern me a little bit is the lack of experience behind the starters at offensive line. Maybe we just got a little spoiled last year with so many guys who had contributed. But yeah, outside of the starters, guys who have contributed are really not a whole lot. I mean, Miguel Machado was talked about as being a guy who could have played last year a little bit. Brandon Clemens is a guy who's played on defense a little bit. But yeah, like the lack of depth on the offensive line, and we know what the angry MSU offensive lineman hating God is thinking of this depth chart right now. That concerns me a little bit. But other than that, I mean, pretty straightforward. Monty Medeiros was interesting over DeAnthony Arnett. I'm sure that there are some hot takes on that. And yeah, and then the other thing was Gerald Owens behind TJ Harrell. I kind of figured that he would have been higher, maybe in the mix in an starting or rotation with London and Holmes. That's a little concerning, but yeah. Other than that, I mean, pretty excited. The last thing that was interesting, I thought, was that Tyler O'Connor was the clear number 2. There was no or with O'Connor and Terry.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty interesting. I don't know if that means anything or not, but as interesting as something on a spring depth chart can be.
I mean, he's a guy going into his 4th year in the program, so they always kind of tend to like that. Talking about the offensive line, am I misremembering? Was Benny McGowan injured last year and knocked out?
I don't think he was injured. I mean, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think he really played.
There was somebody early in the year who got knocked out, but it doesn't. Name escapes me. I looked it up. It doesn't appear to be him. But Machado's a guy who they did like. McGowan's a guy who they've said good things about. Clemens is a guy who's switched both sides of the ball. So it is inexperienced, but I think between the 5 starters you've got there in Jack Conklin, Brian and Jack Allen, Donovan Clark, and Cody Keeler, I think are 5 really solid guys, like you said. If they have to get into depth, we'll see how that goes. But that's I mean, it's only spring. They're not, starting the season now. The whole point of spring is to get more experience and see who fits where. So that's where that'll be. Other than that, nothing really stuck out. Something stuck out. MSU is going to be holding on Saturday, the first 300 students who signed up somewhere on the MSU site would get to see the end of practice and then participate in their own 1-hour clinic with the team and the coaches, which was interesting. I found really interesting. I know Ohio State does the thing where they have a practice where they let any students who want to show up can come in, but to actually have students who are going to run through a clinic, I found really interesting, and it takes me back to last year. The whole issue that comes up every year with the student section, and the fact that the football team made a point to reach out to the students and involve the students with pregame videos and stuff during the week. So this appears to be kind of another step toward that, in that the team's going to try to invest in the students and hope that the students invest back in them by staying to games, showing up.
Yeah, games. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if it'll make a difference, but I think that's what my guess is. That's probably what's behind it, at least.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. But the issue is that the 300 students that would have showed up were the 300 that stayed anyways. But and then also, like, the issue isn't necessarily that there is not student interest. The problem is that when you have a game at 8 p.m. and it's rainy and cold, it's hard to stay, right? Even as somebody who got to sit down for most of the game and didn't have to be there 2 hours beforehand for that Nebraska game, like, that's kind of a rough evening,
Yeah, the Nebraska game got the attention, and that was because, frankly, the team let Nebraska nearly come back and win that game. I think it's the September home games when the weather's nice and you play a Florida Atlantic and the section's half full. But at the same time, this team's won 11 games 4 out of 5 years. It's not going to get any better. It's pretty clear that the section is too big. I think they need to. I've suggested this before. I think they need to cut the upper deck. And also, they worry about students who buy tickets just to resell them. I think you have all the information on the IDs when they swipe them in. The people who consistently arrive the earliest, give them a pre-sale to student tickets, maybe a week before, and then release it to everybody. That way you get the hardcore fans who want to show up, they get their tickets, and then so you make sure the ones that want to show up, you make sure that they're able to show up, and then you see if you can fill in the rest of it. It's an issue every year with schools and drawing fans. It's easier to watch games on your couch, can't drink in the stadium, yada, yada, yada. We've kind of talked about this ad nauseum, but that's just kind of my idea. But I will say it's an interesting idea by MSU. I'm sure any student who goes is going to have a good time. So, good for them. Spring game is April. What's the date here?
Is it 25th, or is it earlier?
April 25th. Yeah, and it's free.
Yeah.
They want to try to draw 50,000. It's later in the year, so it should be warmer. I don't know if they'll get 50 or not, but it's always a good time. We'll see what they do. But spring football's starting up, so get ready for a lot of talk about positions and guys who may or may not step up. It's kind of a lot of ado about nothing, but it's football, and we all love football. But as Izzo said today, for this weekend, MSU is back to being a basketball school, so that will be the focus this weekend, and then WrestleMania on Sunday night. So should be a fun weekend.
Speaking of wrestling, actually, I got an email from a guy who was complaining about how bad the MSU wrestling program has been.
It's been rough for a while. They got a coach there. His name escapes me, but he's a great guy. He's been around for a long time, but it clearly hasn't been working for quite a while. You've had some similar situations in non-revenue sports where they want to change, but whether or not how budgets are, if they can afford to make changes. The facilities at MSU for wrestling are not the greatest. And then you look at the Big Ten Conference, and it is head and shoulders by far the best wrestling conference. Iowa's a national power. Penn State's a national power. Ohio State just won the Big Ten, just won the national championship. But Central Michigan regularly beats MSU in wrestling. So I can't speak to too many specifics, but I know it's a program that's been down for quite a while. But it's also a program that maybe doesn't exactly have a high ceiling at the same time. So I think that kind of goes into it.
Yeah, the email I got suggested that I write up a piece, and I just don't know anything about wrestling. But I do feel like mentioning it on the pod is at least something, right?
Yeah, I mean, talk about non-revenue sports. Baseball has started up. I think they've started Big Ten play now. I think they're getting back to campus this week. I think they play Oakland this week. Hockey season, if you didn't catch it, they lost to Michigan Friday night in the Big Ten tournament. I went to that game. Played really bad, which is kind of a disappointing way for the team to go out based on how they'd been playing for the last 2 months. But so their season ends. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but the story now is if Jake Hildebrand will come back or if he'll get an offer from an NHL team to sign and join them. So that'll be the big thing to watch. That'll be the biggest key in determining how MSU does next year. They lose a little bit of offense, but Minnesota won the Big Ten over Michigan. They get the NCAA tournament bid and are going on with that. So anything else you wanted to touch on?
Nope, that's all I got.
Yeah, and I will say that the guy who was upset with MSU wrestling, that's not the same kind of wrestling at WrestleMania.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, although Brock Lesnar was a national champion wrestler at Minnesota, so it does pay off. So that'll do it for us here. Join us Friday night after the MSU Oklahoma game for the post-game show, and make sure you subscribe on iTunes and check out everything on theoldcolors.com for a lot of great stuff this week. And we will talk to you guys later. See you.